What is going on, everyone? It's the Reformation Keegan, and today I'm going to respond to X's hot takes on Twitter or whatever you call it now. Anyway, I'm responding to your hot takes on professional wrestling. Some are very unpopular opinions, others, not so much. Let's get to it right here, right now. All right, so we got a series of questions here. So I'm going to start with three because they're all in the same picture. So number one is from Hounds of Wrestling, and the question is, what if Austin didn't win the King of the Ring in 1996? Wow, I think a lot of things could have happened. It definitely could have been a huge butterfly effect. I think Triple H was the original plan to win the 96 King of the Ring, but he was getting punished, I believe, due to the curtain call. So Austin was the contingency plan. However, if things would have went the way they were supposed to with Triple H winning the King of the Ring, Austin was still on that trajectory, in my opinion. I don't know. Maybe the Austin 316 would have came later, but if it never did, yes, you wouldn't have had the merchandise with the shirts and the huge sales for that. But Austin still would have got over, and Austin still would have ended up becoming the top babyface in the company. He just may have not had the Austin 316 slogan with it. And he only really used it not that long afterward, anyway. So I think Austin would have been fine because he just had it on his shirt, but he didn't really use the Austin 316 catchphrase much after like 97 ish. So I think Austin, for the most part, would have been okay. Now we have the two other questions. So the first one is from Chris Salima. What if Michael Cole was the actual anonymous Raw GM? He should have been in the end. The Hornswoggle thing I think was kind of a wet fart on the whole storyline, especially because they had it going for almost a year, right? If I remember correctly. And Michael Cole being the obnoxious heel that he was, it would have made sense. And him targeting Jerry Lawler and all the baby faces, again, it would have made sense for it to have been Michael Cole, and I think it should have been Michael Cole because who else would it really have been at that time as an authority figure with a power struggle? It only would have been Michael Cole because he was the main antagonizing heel, right? So it really couldn't have been anybody else, and I think it just would have furthered his feud with Jerry the King Lawler, and that probably would have been it. The other question is from Dr. Zeus G. Sorry, I couldn't remember. I couldn't see the rest of it. What if Roman never gets COVID? Which Brock isn't put in the Big E match. Maybe there's never a title for title with Roman as Brock, and maybe Big E doesn't get hurt. So with this one, I think I commented on your post a little bit earlier. It may be the biggest butterfly effect in wrestling history, at least WWE history, that is, because if Roman doesn't get sick, from what I heard, the original plan was Brock Lesnar was going to win the Universal Championship. So I think probably what would have happened is Roman would have won the 2022 Rumble, challenged Brock at WrestleMania, and won back the Universal title, which means we don't get the 1,000 plus day run. And I believe Seth was supposed to win the WWE title at day one. So would they have done Seth and Cody for the championship, especially because Austin was already going to be facing Kevin Owens? That would have been really intriguing. And then Big E doesn't get hurt, right? And he broke his neck and might never wrestle again. And it's a shame because Big E's absolutely one heck of a talent. And if this would have happened how you mentioned it, Big E would have never been injured, and we would have still had another top player on the main roster. So yeah, a lot of butterfly effects with Roman getting COVID. Up next, we have at Incredible Edible Abominable, I believe. Sorry if I got that wrong. They ask, what if the WWF released HBK instead of Bret Hart? I feel Austin winning the belt from Bret would have made far more sense than Austin beating HBK. I agree. I think if they did an Austin and Bret rematch for WrestleMania 14, but this time in the main event, they could have had Austin finally dethrone Bret, and Bret could have kept the title a while longer past Survivor Series, and Shawn could have faced somebody else. Maybe you do Shawn and Triple H that early, which maybe that was too early, but maybe you do Shawn and a young Rock. If everybody's egos stay together, because I remember them having some issues. Or you can do a triple threat because Shawn was, also a top guy at that time, and maybe Shawn doesn't injure his back, right? That's the other thing. So you can do Bret, Austin, and Shawn at WrestleMania, and then maybe for WrestleMania 15, you can finally get that Bret and Austin rematch, and then The Rock can maybe again wrestle Shawn Michaels for WrestleMania 15, since Shawn wouldn't be injured, right? So that's how I would have done that one. At Lives Blue asks, What if Giovanni Vinci never left NXT in the first place to join Imperium? Well, he'd probably still be doing the same like picture esque gimmick, the model gimmick, I think it was in NXT, which I could have seen him having an NXT title run down there. And I think he should have stayed in Imperium. That's just my opinion. But I think if he was staying in NXT a while longer, he probably would have won the NXT title, and they would have gave him more of an opportunity to develop as a gimmick as well. And up next from Rob Hasselberg, 1992. What if the Velveteen Dream wasn't a POS outside the ring? I don't want to get too far into this topic, but let's just say if the Velveteen Dream didn't have any of the problems that happened, he definitely would have been a WWE champion by now, and maybe even a WrestleMania main eventer. I think Velveteen Dream was going to be the guy in the industry. Great talker, great in the ring, great charisma. He had it all. Now Keith Langley asks, "What if Kurt Angle stayed in the WWE his whole career and didn't have an addiction?" This is one of the bigger ones that I kind of want to answer because, as many of you know, Kurt Angle's my all-time favorite wrestler. Even though I loved his TNA run, I wish selfishly he could have main evented more WrestleManias in WWE and maybe had a program with CM Punk. Please, I think that would have been amazing. Kurt Angle and CM Punk in a program in WWE in the late 2000s and even early 2010s. That would have been absolute money. He probably would have kept feuding with John Cena. He would have feuded with Randy Orton, Triple H, Punk, like I said. So he definitely would have had a lot more world titles. I think he could have even reached 16. I think he was at 6 by the time he left the company, and he was still going to be pushed as a permanent main eventer anyway. So I think Kurt could have possibly hit 16 world titles, and I think he would have main evented about 3 or 4 WrestleManias and still had probably the best match of the year for every year for the next 7 or 8 years. So I think that's what he would have done. I think he would have had a great heel run as the United States champion, just being arrogant. I also could have seen that. Maybe even a Money in the Bank win just to add to his legacy. Who knows? But I think Kurt definitely would have done a whole lot more if the circumstances aligned. At Fretzelmania podcast asks, "Forgive me if this is too morbid, but what if Owen Hart and Eddie Guerrero didn't pass away?" Well, I think Owen would have had a resurgence between like 2000 and 2002, I want to say, because the in-ring product had really gotten better at that time, and you had guys like Eddie Guerrero coming in, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, Chris Jericho. You still had X Pac, so I think he would have thrived in 2000. Especially feuding with like Jericho, Benoit, Eddie for the European and Intercontinental titles. And then I think by 2001, you would have seen him back in the main event scene. He would have fit perfectly, in my opinion, in that 2002 SmackDown era. I think he definitely could have been a main eventer in the 2002 era of SmackDown, taking on like Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle, maybe even the Undertaker. So I think there could have been a lot going on for him there around that time. And then we could have got obviously matches with Eddie and Benoit still again, and Owen Hart and Rey Mysterio, which would have been really cool. So I think he would have done a lot. And then as for Eddie Guerrero, Matt White also asked the same question: "Is what if Eddie Guerrero was still alive today?" Um, I think he would obviously, have done a lot more. We would have got Eddie and Shawn at Mania 22. I think the main event of WrestleMania 23 would have been Eddie Guerrero and The Undertaker because it was the two big SmackDown stars that had never feuded. So Taker wins the Rumble. Eddie's World Heavyweight Champion. It writes itself. I think it goes on over Cena and Michaels because Eddie and Taker would be like a first time pay-per-view match. So I think it would have been huge. And then he would have probably feuded with Ray again, feuded with Batista, feuded with John Cena, Triple H. Maybe we would have got Eddie and Bryan Danielson, possibly, depending on how Eddie felt when he got a bit older. Maybe he retires against AJ Styles at WrestleMania 32 if he's healthy. That would have been great. So anyway, that's what I think of if Eddie Guerrero didn't pass, and he obviously would have gotten in the Hall of Fame a bit later and would have had a great induction. And what if Cena turned heel at SummerSlam in his match with Bryan? Well, I think it would have been really cool if Cena was the one that was the face of the Authority. Cena turns in the match with Bryan, and then Triple H helps him, pedigrees Bryan. That would have been huge. Then you get John Cena versus Daniel Bryan, maybe in the main event of WrestleMania 30. Bryan can still beat Triple H. Uh, I just don't know where Randy Orton would have ended up in all of it, but heel Cena against Daniel Bryan, sign me the hell up. That was by Cloud Cobain at Jack Topher 88. And Paul, laying SmackDown, says, what if Sting and Goldberg were a part of the invasion angle? I don't think Goldberg would have lost in the invasion angle. I think he would have beaten everybody and then eventually did a streak versus streak with The Undertaker at WrestleMania 18. And I think when Sting came in, he obviously was sided with WCW. And for WrestleMania 18, we would have got Sting versus The Rock, Icon versus Icon, and Stinger picks up the win. That's what I think would have probably happened. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. At Benzib's Comedy, I believe, says, what if Abyss came in to wrestle Taker at WrestleMania? And what if TK didn't debut the Motor City Machine Guns, Chris Sabin on a tape show? I don't recall that, but I know the Motor City Machine Guns are free agents. And there's, I think, a bid between AEW and WWE of who's going to get them. So I haven't heard anything about that, truthfully. But for the Abyss and Taker, that was supposed to happen at WrestleMania 23, and Abyss turned it down, which means Abyss just would have been another victim of the streak. But I think Abyss in the Ruthless Aggression era in WWE would have been an amazing fit. He could have had a feud with Taker, and then Batista and John Cena. He would have been a great foil for John Cena. Abyss and Triple H, no DQ, probably would have been pretty great too. Abyss and Orton. So there could have been a lot for him. He could have probably had a nice, decent run there. Maybe even won a world title, which I think he would have. Abyss was awesome, one of the best TNA performers ever. And Abyss and Undertaker at WrestleMania, holy cow, man, that would have been something. Spock's Evil Clone says, what if Jeff Jarrett and Toby Keith had purchased TNA from the Carters? I think you would have seen TNA have a very more NWA-esque product like it did in the early 2000s, like 2002 to 2007-ish, I want to say, maybe even 2008. So I think you would have that kind of product going. Even more, like even though Dixie was still buying it there, you would see that product continue onward. And you'd see more of an old school product that I think would still be prevalent today. DX2 words 1 says, what if ECW never went out of business? That could have affected the whole rise of the independent promotions in the 2000s. I wholeheartedly agree, but you know what? I still think companies like Ring of Honor and even TNA still would have been around, but I could have seen ECW, Ring of Honor, and TNA all operating together. That would have been huge. That definitely could have been revolutionary for wrestling because Paul Heyman even said ECW wasn't meant to last fully. So I could have seen ECW merging together with a TNA and Ring of Honor and making like a tri popular product where you have all three kind of uniting as one, kind of like an NWA of sorts, where you have like three major companies uniting under one umbrella. I definitely could have seen that with TNA, with Ring of Honor, with ECW, and I think that definitely would have been revolutionary in the 2000s because you would have had that whole ECW product on one night, TNA on another, and maybe even Ring of Honor gets a TV deal. Who knows? It definitely could have been competition for WWE, and I even get excited thinking about it, thinking about how that could have panned out. Like you could have had Mike Awesome, back for another big run too, and he was amazing. And you could have had a lot of these other guys, Jerry Lynn too. He had a big run in TNA. I couldn't imagine what he would do with ECW, Ring of Honor, TNA all together because he was also great in Ring of Honor. So it definitely would have been a really cool time to have seen all that. So kind of get emotional thinking about it because that could have been very revolutionary for pro wrestling. One T-Neck original asks four questions here, so I'm gonna go through them a little bit rapid fire. What if the Undertaker was a failed gimmick? Well, then he would just have to be the American Badass, I think, his entire career, and just obviously go under a different gimmick name, or just go by Mark Calloway, the American Badass Mark Calloway. Be kind of cool. Or I think he'd probably go back to Japan as Mean Mark Callis, and I think no matter where the Undertaker went, I think he was going to have a pretty successful career. So maybe he's just the American Badass his entire career in WWE. What say you? I think he still would have been over. What if The Rock got that football scholarship? think it's an easy question here for me to answer. I think that he just would have played football, went to WWE 5, 6, 7 years later than he originally did, still got red hot, and still went to Hollywood. The only difference would be he wouldn't have been in the Attitude Era feuding with Austin. He would have been in the Ruthless Aggression Era feuding with John Cena and Randy Orton. So Rock and Cena would have been a bit earlier. What if Hogan didn't hog the spotlight? Well, Sting would have won Starrcade 1997 clean. What if Stone Cold didn't hurt his knees on top of his back and his neck? I could have seen Austin in the Ruthless Aggression Era feuding with Cena, Orton, Undertaker again, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Triple H, you name it. Austin still would have been the guy. And on top of the card, probably main evented 3 or 4 more WrestleManias. And we would have got that big Austin and Cena match, maybe Mania 24, maybe Mania 25. Would have been pretty awesome. Or maybe he's the one that put over Cena at Mania 21. What say you? Silent Evil 77 asks, what if Kofi had found a way to beat Brock? Well, it's one of the worst decisions I think ever in wrestling to have Kofi drop the belt in 10 seconds, especially the way it was done. I just felt bad for Kofi. I think everybody did, and I don't know exactly what the plans were if Kofi were to retain, but I do know that I think a New Day triple threat for WrestleMania 36, barring COVID, would have been absolutely amazing. And if none of them want to turn heel, even though I prefer a face and heel dynamic, I still think it would have worked because the bond between those three definitely would have been an emotional story. Maybe Big E wins the title there instead of cashing in Money in the Bank a year later. That could be a thing, but that means Kofi would have held the belt a year. I think he was 6 months into his run, and having a championship run going in the 6 months and already beating Randy Orton and beating Samoa Joe and to drop it in 10 seconds absolutely made no sense. And it was a lazy decision. And Kofi deserved a lot better than that. And I think he would have dropped it at WrestleMania 36 to Big E in a New Day triple threat, which I think would have been really, really cool. The Toasted Elf asks, what if Randy Savage wrestled 10 more years? I can't see Randy wrestling 10 more years. I think his last full time year was late 99, early 2000. And I think maybe to 2002, I could have seen it, even though he did wrestle in TNA in 2004. But like, let's say hypothetically, he goes back to WWE. I think 2002 would have been one last good run for him because we could have gotten like Randy and Austin, Randy and Rock, and that would have been really cool. Maybe he comes back for WrestleMania 18, does a big match there. So it would have been really cool, but I can't see Randy going past 2002 because he would have been 57 by the time he retired in 2010. So yeah, I can't see him going past probably 2002, maybe 2003, but I think 2002 is a safe bet. At Asan Richard asks, what if HBK didn't injure his back? So obviously we're alluding to the 1998 Royal Rumble. I know a lot of people that have answered this question before have brought up Sean's real life to say, oh, he may have, overdosed or things like that. But I'm just going to stick to creative for this. And I want to say Sean never injures his back. I still think he would have went through some kind of reform in his life, but he just would have been around, right? He would have been around in 98, 99, 2000, and 2001 on top of 2002. So I think he probably would have main evented another Mania, obviously, but like maybe The Rock doesn't get pushed as a main eventer right away. He still does, just not maybe right away in 98-ish. So I think Shawn maybe wrestles Undertaker at Mania 15. That could have been a possibility because I think you'd still probably end up doing Rock and Austin. I don't think there would have been a Shawn and Austin round 2. So Shawn and Undertaker may have happened 10 years earlier than WrestleMania 25, and maybe we get that rematch 10 years later. That would have been kind of a really cool dynamic. And then for 2000, maybe he feuds with like Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit. Still at the top of the card, maybe Shawn and Triple H is the WrestleMania 2000 main event because Triple H was really coming into his own as a top heel, so I could have seen that. And then 2001-ish sides with WWE in the Invasion if we're still doing that angle, and maybe that's where Shawn Michaels and The Rock end up feuding. So I could have seen that for Shawn Michaels if he never injured his back. And then Latimus 2K asks, what if Hall and Nash never went to WCW? it's a loaded topic because without Hall and Nash going to WCW, the Monday Night Wars definitely wouldn't have been as competitive as they were. And Hall and Nash were the two most significant reasons that WCW got to where it was. I think if Scott Hall could have morphed the Scott Hall himself and Razor Ramon together, he could have worked in the Attitude Era for WWE, but he would have had to have kind of morphed those two personalities together. As for Kevin Nash, there's no way he could have done the Diesel gimmick in the Attitude Era. He would have just had to have been Kevin Nash and gone that route. But I don't know where Kevin Nash would have fit in the Attitude Era. And I don't even know where Scott would have fit. And Scott was amazing. So was Kevin. But it's really hard to predict where those guys would have fit in WWE in 97, 98, 99, 2000. Like I said, if Scott could have morphed the Razor Ramon and Scott Hall himself together as a gimmick, that would have been really cool. So, but I don't know where they fit, truthfully. At Kondakar Saad asks, what if Magnum TA never got in his accident? No, this is definitely another big one that I was really excited to answer. And Magnum TA is one of the best baby faces of all time. If you've never seen him versus Tully Blanchard from Starrcade 1985, it was a steel cage I quit match. One of the best matches I've ever seen. I highly recommend watching it. You can watch it on the WWE Network and maybe on YouTube, Daily Motion, wherever. But it's a 5-star classic that everybody should watch. So Magnum, I think you would have had Magnum and Sting as the two top baby faces for WCW, because a lot of people say like, well, would Sting have gotten his push? I still believe he would have, and you would have Magnum and Sting as the two top baby faces. So Magnum would have won the NWA title, I think, many times. I think him and Flair would have been generational. Him and Steamboat would have been generational. Him and Sting would have been generational. I don't think he ever would have turned heel. I think Magnum would have always stayed as a babyface, kind of like how Ricky Steamboat did. It's just he was just a great babyface. So I think Magnum would have been a staple for the NWA and WCW going into the 90s, probably till like the end of the 1990s. Magnum would probably still be against the NWO because I believe he only would have been in his late 30s by the end of the 90s. So I think Magnum would have definitely have been feuding with the NWO, probably won the WCW title. Like I said, him and Sting would have been the two top baby faces for the next decade and a half. They would have ruled over WCW. And would he go to WWE? I don't know. I mean, maybe to cap off his career after WCW closes, maybe he does a WrestleMania, because he would have been way more than a big enough star at that time to have made the crossover and maybe do a couple matches with Rock Austin and maybe Undertaker, Triple H possibly. So I think Magnum definitely would have been a massive star and definitely would have been one of the biggest stars in the history of pro wrestling. Now, B. Bart for Prez asks, what if Bret Hart never suffered that concussion he got after Goldberg kicked him? I think Bret probably would have went back to the WWE in the invasion angle for WrestleMania 18 in Canada. You would have had Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon. Bret Hart would have beat him to a pulp. They would have had a street fight, kind of like how Vince and Hogan did. Bret would win, and that would be the end of that. But Bret also wouldn't be representing WCW. He would just be coming back because he hates both companies, and Bret Hart just wants to do what's best for Bret Hart. So that's how I think it would have worked out. And then he would have had a few more years in WWE. I think you would have got matches with Edge, Chris Jericho, The Undertaker again, Shawn Michaels again, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and most of all, Kurt Angle. Bret Hart would have retired against Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 20. That's my prediction. So WrestleMania 20 would have been the end. You would have got Bret Hart versus Kurt Angle, and that would have been a classic, and that's how Bret would have bowed out. At Athletic Geek 89 asks, what if Nigel McGinness passed his physical and got to be in WWE? It's an emotional question because Nigel's my favorite Ring of Honor wrestler ever. And I think everybody wishes Nigel would have ended up as a performer in WWE because remember Seth Rollins said at one time, he said, Nigel may be the greatest wrestler that no one's ever known. Granted, we know him. But what I think what he meant is he should have been at that permanent main event level in the WWE. And Nigel definitely had the talent, definitely had the promo ability, definitely had a great look, loads of charisma. He definitely should have been a permanent main eventer in WWE and possibly a guy that main evented WrestleMania. If he did end up getting signed, Nigel would have easily been a top guy, easily feuding with guys like Bryan Danielson, guys like CM Punk, John Cena, the top crop of talent at that time were Nigel and Randy Orton. Man, that could have been amazing. That could have been a WrestleMania match. And I think Nigel would have been a WWE champion. And I think Nigel would have had a probably nice 10-year run there. At least I think he would have had a 10-year run. Probably would have had a Mania main event possibly. But like I said, Nigel and Bryan, Nigel and Orton, Nigel and Cena, he definitely would have been a top guy on that roster. Easily. Easily, way too talented to not be. And then another question we have is, what if Punk broke Taker's streak by at Geek Salad Radio? I think if he broke the streak in Mania 29, I think he would have never left. I think that would have shown how much they thought of him to have Punk break the streak. And that story with him and Taker, man, amazing. But Punk probably would have won the title back eventually too after he broke the streak as a heel. And maybe it's Punk that sells himself out to the Authority and becomes the new face, and you have Punk as the corporate stooge. That leads to CM Punk versus Daniel Bryan in the main event of WrestleMania 30. Let me know what you think of that idea. And last but not least, Kazzy Baby 2 asks, what if Vince gave up on Roman Reigns and pushed Dean Ambrose instead? So, I mean, Dean Ambrose slash John Moxley is going to be a main event player, right? And they all three of them were going to be main event players, but yeah, Roman definitely got pushed the most out of the three members of the Shield. And if Vince would have gave up on Roman Reigns and kind of saddled him in the upper mid card and pushed Dean Ambrose, I think it would have worked at the time because Ambrose was really over, right? Like that 2014, 15, 16 era, like he was super over. And I really would have struck when the iron was hot, especially like around 2016. Like let's say 2016 is the time where Vince decides, okay, you know what, like let's go with Ambrose right now. Maybe Reigns is not as hot as we want him to be, and let's go with Ambrose. We'll try Reigns later. And Ambrose wins the 2016 Rumble, wins WWE title at Mania, has pretty decent run till he drops it to AJ later in the year. I think that definitely would have panned out for everybody because it would have given Roman a break from the main event scene at that time, kind of let him freshen up, kind of maybe retool. And Ambrose definitely would have still been over as a top babyface. So I think it would have actually benefited Reigns in a lot of ways because then Reigns would have time for a year or two to really kind of, get himself up, and kind of build his way up and build himself up as a character, as a gimmick, or if you want to say that, as a performer. And I think it would have panned out. And Moxley was ready for that at the time. And, he really should have main evented Mania 32. So that's my take on it.